Minnesota.
Juicy stuff from Adam Schefter, whose sources are telling him that Dalvin Cook is going to sit out. We're going to get to Courtney Cronin here, our friend from ESPN.com who covers the Vikings after we talk about Federated Insurance. Federated is here to help business owners. My sources tell me that Federated is here to help you business owners with a really, really tumultuous and crazy 90-day period here where communication to employees could be different than it was, where the way that you go about reopening your business could involve multiple steps. If you're looking for trusted resources as a business owner, go to federatedinsurance.com or call your local marketing representative to get those resources. At Federated Mutual Insurance Company, it's our business to protect yours. Welcome to Purple Daily. I'm Phil Mackey, Judd Zolgad, Declan Goff producing. And let's get right to it. Courtney Cronin, our friend from ESPN.com and also a longtime friend of Purple Daily. How much leverage does Dalvin Cook even really have with what has come out here in the last 24 hours, Courtney? Welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you guys for having me. It's been a minute. I think the thing here is that why now? Like, typically, if somebody's going to announce a holdout, we typically don't get an idea about that until closer to training camp. I mean, look at the Texans last year with Jadeveon Clowney. Like, at this time, it was, yeah, he's probably going to get there. We're probably anticipating he's not showing up for camp without a new deal, but it wasn't like he announced it or his agent, representation, whomever announced it in June 8th of last year. I mean, that's the thing that's like a little bit of a mind blowing, just realizing, okay, like all these weeks before training camp, the state of the world, the circumstances surrounding everything right now. I mean, Mike Zimmer doesn't have a contract extension either. Anthony Harris's deal hasn't been worked out. They haven't signed a single freaking player from their draft class.
Right.
It's just like, none of this makes sense, at least just in terms of the timeline. But, Cook has been, an active participant in the virtual off-season program, the stuff they're doing over, the computer, but is no longer going to participate until he gets a new deal. Like, I think, you can respect the holdout because that's what you have to do in terms of leverage for yourself to protect yourself if you don't have the deal that you want. But with Cook's leverage, I mean, you can look at the stats. You can look at like his impact on the field. Like, here's a good one. He played 31 games in his career, including the playoffs. His production can be directly tied to the Vikings' success over the last 3 seasons because since 2017, the Vikings are 12-3 when Cook has at least 100 yards from scrimmage in a game and 6-9-1 when he has fewer than 100 yards. You can pull every stat in the book like that to back the case of you need to pay him what he is deserving of. And I think Dalvin should get paid. I think he can make top 5 running back money, not the upper echelon of a Christian McCaffrey, but he's deserving of being paid like he is one of the face of the franchise. But where things stand right now, I mean, the Vikings kind of have most of the leverage here. They were blindsided by this yesterday. Sources I've spoken with, they had no clue this was coming out. So they're kind of like, well, what the heck's going on here? B, like, they're not in any rush to do this. Like, these things typically happen right before training camp. Go back the last few years. Stephon Diggs was July 31st because he screwed up my 28th birthday, which was August 1st. I was supposed to be golfing that day. And because of the Diggs contract and it came down the day before, I was working all day. So thanks, Stephon. You're not even here anymore.
And then he forced his way out.
And then beyond that, he forced his way out, wrecked my 28th birthday. Thanks. But no, I mean, Everson Griffin, Linval Joseph, Xavier Rhodes, the list goes on and on. They typically do these on the eve of training camp, which is why just the timing of it is a little precarious of why now that did he need to, through sources announce that. But, beyond that, like, a holdout does not help the case of Dalvin Cook at all because with the new CBA. So Article 8, Section 1B says that a player shall not receive an accrued season for any league year in which the player is under contract to a club in which he failed to report to the club's preseason training camp. So he's not going to accrue a season and he'd be a restricted free agent after 2020. That does him no good. That takes all of his leverage away. So it's a weird situation, but as Adam said in the drop that you played, I mean, this is the storyline, and we knew it would be. Like, I mean, realistically, we knew that this would be the thing going into training camp, and the one thing you'd be keeping an eye on because they locked Kirk Cousins up to the extension in free agency. They had to let go of a lot of defensive pieces, so we knew there would be a turnover there. And then the next logical thing is, okay, well, what are you going to do with Dalvin Cook?
I feel like, Courtney, too, that from everything that you just put together and putting the pieces of what's going on here, I feel like it's very simple. Dalvin Cook is getting awful advice here. And how on earth the Players Association, which is the worst in sports, it's just god awful, it's embarrassing, how they agreed to the stipulation that you just read, when that is in this league leverage, I have no clue. But I think the answer to your question of why now is Dalvin Cook's agent and reps are giving him terrible advice, because I don't see how coming out and saying this now, and I actually don't see how holding out helps him, because yes, you could be Zeke. You could sign on September 4th, you could sign a massive contract and glory, hallelujah, it's fantastic. Guess what else? You could be Melvin Gordon too. So
yeah,
I think
absolutely.
And last thing, we are in the midst of a pandemic, okay? I don't say that lightly. It's a pandemic. There are credible reports that the salary cap for 2021 could come down by as much as $40 million. I will then flip to the Vikings side and say it would be damn irresponsible to sign a running back to a huge, lucrative salary cap eating contract if indeed you are fearful that the cap for 21 is going to come down, let's say, by 30 to 40 or more $million. Dalvin Cook, your timing sucks, buddy.
Yeah, I mean, and you brought up a good point about the cap, Judd. Like, when you look at what it was supposed to go up to next year, I think people were estimating north of $200 million. If we don't have fans in the stands, and or if it's decreased to 40%, 20%, what have you, that's going to take a direct hit on what teams are allowed to spend next year. So they have to factor that in. They have to protect themselves. The whole idea here, like about the contract language or the CBA language, is really confusing, because I wrote a piece on like what a Dalvin Cook contract extension could look like in March, like right before free agency, and that was right when Austin Eckler signed his deal. And I know a lot of people would think this is crazy, but at the time I kind of thought, hey, that's not a bad deal for Cook deservedly is a much better running back. I mean, just different caliber, but like in terms of what the running back value is seen across the league, yes, we saw a little bit of a spike from Todd Gurley to David Johnson to Le'Veon Bell, Ezekiel Elliott. Well, what's the bottom line there? All of those contracts have been criticized and critiqued, and they look terrible in a lot of respects. Mm-hmm. I like Christian McCaffrey. I don't think he's worth $16 million a year, even if you are 80% of the team's offense or whatever he was. Like, I just, it's very clear. And like Adam had reported that, the Vikings are very much, they believe in Kirk Cousins because they gave him that deal. They also kind of, they could concede that even if they didn't have Dalvin Cook this year, I mean, it hurts Dalvin to sit out more than it hurts the Vikings. I mean, in the worst case scenario, you run with Alexander Mattison and a committee of backs with Amir Abdullah and Mike Boone. None of those guys are Dalvin Cook. Like, let's not sugarcoat it. Dalvin is a very special player. He makes Kirk Cousins' life a lot easier. But the Vikings are built for 2021 and beyond. Like, they are not in a position where they have to win in 2020. I mean, they have a brand new wide receiver to replace Stephon Diggs, an entire new group of cornerbacks. Like, it's almost kind of like they're setting themselves up to say, like, yeah, if we do well this year, if we make the playoffs, it's gravy. But like 2021 is kind of when you put your feet to the fire because of the way that the team has been built. So if Dalvin doesn't want to show up, and if he doesn't want to play for the Vikings in 2020 without a contract, I think that the Vikings could force their hand and be like, okay, just like you mentioned, Judd, the Melvin Gordon situation. How'd that work out? Like, it's not as cut and dry of, you hold out, you'll eventually get what you want. Like, and I am a firm believer, though, and I tweeted this and I reported this in speaking with people on both sides. I certainly think something's going to get done. You know what negotiations are? I give you a high figure, I get lowballed. I come back with something else, I get lowballed again. You meet in the middle. It's not like this has to get done right away, and it's not like the first offer that's on the table is the one that you take. Like, that's the art of the negotiation. It's very simple. And I just think that we're going to eventually get there. It's not going to happen anytime in the next, I wouldn't anticipate before like the eve of training camp, like I mentioned.
So this is, there's another interesting angle here, I think, that we should account for. And it sort of piggybacks off what Judd brought up. If Ian Rappaport's report about $40 million off the salary cap, if that, let's say the Vikings and other teams are all looking at a drastic reduction in salary cap, then obviously you have to be more mindful about the contracts that you're signing. But What I would want to know is, are the Vikings, by entering contract negotiations with Dalvin Cook, are they bidding against themselves when we're talking about $13 to $16 million, which is, what the top tier of running backs make? And I'll give you, I am not comparing Dalvin Cook to Andrew Wiggins by any stretch of the imagination, other than the negotiating process. The Timberwolves, rather than letting Andrew Wiggins go out in restricted free agency at the time and see what other teams would pay for him, they decided, let's just lock him up, 6 months beforehand or whatever it was, 8 months beforehand, and we're going to pay him a max contract. And obviously they regretted that deal. I would want to know right now, based on Dalvin Cook's injury history, based on his position, based on the cap maybe coming down, if he was an unrestricted free agent right now today, like on June 9th, 2020, would another team give him $13, $15, $16 million, or would it be more like $8 or $9 million? Are you bidding against yourself when you're talking about like a $13 million annual average value? Or is that what he would be getting? Do you have any idea? Like, if you were to hit, I know this is complete reckless speculation right now, but if he were to hit the open market right now, would another team offer him $13 million a year, do you think?
I'm not sure if other teams would. You'd have to kind of look at the situation there. I mean, I do know that I think the Vikings would very much be in that ballpark and are willing to go to that ballpark. And by the time this is all said and done, assuming there isn't more, backbiting back and forth stuff that we've kind of seen, I think he will be a $13 million a year running back. I think he's deserving of that. I mean, David Johnson, that contract looks terrible, given, just how things transpired for him after he signed it, the injuries, he signed it coming off injury, and then all that other stuff. And then the way that, they kind of conceded that they were a back by committee team last year. Who knows? I mean, Bill O'Brien clearly sees something in him, and I guess that, he's without DeAndre Hopkins, David Johnson's going to have to earn that $13 million a year in that offense next year. But anyways, I think that that's the value for someone like Cook. But you bring up good points, Phil, that he hasn't played a fully healthy season. Now, you can argue, and I've written this, like, think about the time when Zeke signed his extension. Think about the time that Adrian Peterson signed his extension. The Vikings did this not that long ago. Like, however many years ago, when it was like 2010, so 10 years ago, they signed Adrian to that mega extension, which of course, ended up becoming, they had to like restructure it at certain points and all that. But like where Dalvin Cook is right now in terms of his body and the wear and tear and the touches that, he's accrued over 3 seasons, like Todd Gurley was way beyond where Dalvin is. Adrian was way beyond where Dalvin is in terms of the mileage. And that's important when you're a team thinking about, okay, like, it's just, it doesn't, it doesn't make any sense. Like, think about it this way. So like neither Gurley nor Le'Veon Bell had 1,000 yards rushing last season. And that was after both of them signed absurd contracts that made them the number 2, it was Elliott, and then number 3, the time is obviously 1 and 2 is before McCaffrey got his deal. But like, they got these big deals and then it didn't pan out right away. Like, I think the Vikings are certainly doing their due diligence to realize that, yeah, Dalvin, you have less mileage on your body and we can expect that, the best is yet to come, but you're hedging a lot on that. I'm sorry. Like, you can't deny that there is an injury history there, that he's gotten banged up. Yes, he does have less wear and tear on him in terms of like the gameplay and, all the touches and stats, and that you can anticipate, okay, well, because of that, he's going to be this much better going forward. But it's still, I think that's just a lot of guessing work there that like you could predict that, okay, it will be worth the money by that point.
Speaking of guessing, Courtney Cronin, I got a question for you. What is your theory as we have this discussion in June? What's your theory about the direction of this franchise? Because I agree, this team feels like there's been a definite pivot towards, okay, we'd like to be pretty good in 2020, but this whole thing in their mind is going to take off in 21. The only comeback to those of us who think that is, yeah, but the GM and coach haven't signed contract extensions yet, and so they're going to be entering a lame duck. And, let's say, God forbid for them, it falls apart in 20, and now are they out? What do you think they're doing exactly as far as the philosophy of where they're going from the Wilf's perspective?
Well, I think if you look at the draft, Judd, and kind of how Rick Spielman does some pretty amazing things. When his back is against the wall, he had to nail that draft, and I think he did. I mean, I gave him an A- grade, and I know that most everybody considered them, Baltimore, teams like that, among like the biggest winners in the draft this year. So I think Spielman, who does not have an extension yet, like I feel like he's kind of solidified himself that like I did the best that I could with all of the stuff that went on, with trading Stephon Diggs, getting a humongous haul of draft capital, the whole gamut. But, he did what he needed to do to prove that he deserves an extension. Now, Mike Zimmer, it's kind of like, well, you need to take all the talent that they just got and rework your defense, and then we'll see. I mean, I still anticipate, like, it's so not normal for coaches and GMs to go into lame duck years. So I feel like something's going to happen before the off season ends, that Zimmer will get a contract extension, whether it's 1 year, whenever it happens. I just feel like that's kind of where this thing is trending. But, you could also look at the whole situation and think, hey, well, maybe they just want to like let it play out and be like, you actually have to prove it this year before we give you something like that. I mean, they've had stability under Zimmer. They made the playoffs 3 times. Like, they got as far as the NFC Championship game. The money shows you that they believe in Kirk Cousins. Like, you could have let him ride this thing out, and if you really didn't think that he was going to be the piece that was going to get you over the hump to a Super Bowl, then you let him walk after 2020, after this season. I mean, he had another year left on his contract. They didn't necessarily have to. I mean, unless they really think that if he had a good season or even a decent season, that he'd price himself out of what they could afford next year. But that's the backing. I mean, money talks, and what the money's saying is they believe in their quarterback. So, I mean, that's a lot for a GM and a head coach to kind of hedge on when, things have been, it kind of feels like a straw house a little bit. Like, there's just not a whole ton of foundation that's very strong. Because 1 week is, it's like an emotional roller coaster with this team and covering them. Like, 1 week the sky's falling, and then the next week Kirk's okay and he can win a primetime game. Like, so I think that what that means for Mike Zimmer and Rick Spielman is maybe the Wilfs are going to let this thing ride out and just kind of make them earn it before, when they would typically give an extension. But it just feels like, given the history, and those two have had their contracts linked up, in lockstep since they've both been here, that something will eventually get done. It's just a matter of when. Because like you said, Judd, too, we're in the middle of a pandemic. I know people seem to have forgotten that because of recent events and because it's warm outside.
Yep.
But the pandemic has pushed back a lot of things. Not a single member of the draft class has been signed yet. Like, there's no reason to believe that they're just sitting there twiddling their thumbs. Like, they've kind of been in a period, when everybody's been working remotely. They haven't had a chance to really dive into this stuff, from my understanding. Like, they're not in any rush, so they're going on their own timetable.
That is Courtney Cronin, our friend from ESPN.com, covers the Minnesota Vikings. And here's the rule of thumb with the Vikings: whenever it feels like things have been a little too quiet, something's always around the corner, and that's what happened with the Dalvin Cook news yesterday. Courtney, as we sort of figure this thing out here at Score North and Purple Daily, we'll definitely circle back up with you sometime soon, and we appreciate your insight.
Bye, Courtney.
Of course. Thank you guys for having me.
All right. Follow Courtney, Twitter, Instagram. She does a great job covering the Minnesota Vikings.
You know what? She's right. The Eckler contract, which I don't think the Cook people will take, is perfect. 4 years, $24.5 million. Base salaries of, now 2020, it's only 1.5, but then it goes up in 21 to 4.3, in 2022 to 5, and in 2023 at his age 28 season for Eckler, it goes up to 5.8.
I mean,
they won't take that, but that's she's right. That's a contract.
Yeah,
I do that contract.
Me too, absolutely. But it sounds like it sounds like if it gets done, it's going to be closer to $10+ million, which just feels like I need to know more about what the cap's going to be. I just need to know. Is Ian Rappaport, are they shaving $40 million off the cap for next year? Because if so, it would be a horrible mistake to sign Dalvin Cook to a top 5 running back contract.
If he played cornerback, if he played left tackle, there are certain positions at which I'd probably say, screw it, I'll just do it. I hate it, but I'll do it.
Yeah.
But I'm sorry, man. It's the position. It's not the guy. He's a hell of a player.
Yeah.
But unfortunately for him, he plays first base.
Like, if I had a choice between Dalvin Cook at $13 million or Alex Madison, who I think is a very good running back, at $1 or $2 million, it's a no-brainer if you're asking me right now at this moment.
Yeah.
And I have to project that the cap might come down. So we appreciate you all watching and listening to Purple Daily, Apple, Spotify, ScoreNorth.com, and also YouTube.com/ScoreNorth. Thanks to Courtney for joining us. We'll see you next time on Purple Daily.